Welcome back to ConspiraNap. Before we dive into tonight's investigation, I want to check in with you. How was your day? What time is it where you are right now? Whether you're settling in for the night somewhere in North America, or perhaps it's already morning, where you listen from across the ocean, you're part of our growing community of truth seekers. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back. Either way, please take a moment to subscribe to ConspiraNap. These videos take a bit of time to create. Your support helps us continue digging into these stories they don't want you to hear, the mysteries buried beneath official narratives, and the truths that vanish, along with those brave enough to speak them. Tonight, we're traveling to the eastern tip of Long Island, to a place where the Atlantic Ocean meets secrets that have been buried for decades. This is the story of the Montauk Project, a conspiracy so bizarre, so deeply rooted in documented history, that it inspired one of the most popular shows on Netflix. But what if I told you that stranger things barely scratch the surface of what really happened at Camp Hero? What if the truth is far stranger than any fiction Hollywood could imagine? My name is Sarah Chen, and what you're about to hear isn't just another conspiracy theory. It's a documented pattern of government experimentation that connects the darkest chapters of American intelligence operations to a decommissioned military base where reality itself may have been weaponized. This is the story of how a radar station became a laboratory for horrors that make MK Ultra look like a children's science experiment. Let me start with something that's not in dispute. In 1943, the United States military began one of the most classified experiments in naval history. They called it the Philadelphia Experiment, though officially it never happened. The goal was simple in theory, terrifying in practice: make a naval destroyer invisible to enemy radar. What they got instead, according to witnesses who would later disappear or die under mysterious circumstances, was something far more disturbing. The USS Eldridge didn't just become invisible to radar. According to multiple testimonies, it vanished entirely, teleported through space and time, and returned with crew members fused into the ship's hull, their bodies twisted into the metal like some nightmare fusion of flesh and steel. The official story is that the Philadelphia experiment never happened. The Navy has denied it for 80 years. But here's what they can't deny. The scientists who worked on that project didn't just disappear into history. They were reassigned, relocated, and given new identities. And many of them ended up at a place called Camp Hero, a military installation on the eastern tip of Long Island that would become the epicenter of experiments that make the Philadelphia experiment look like a warm-up act. Camp Hero wasn't some backwater military outpost. During World War II, it was a critical piece of America's coastal defense network. 4 massive 16-inch naval guns, originally intended for battleships, were installed in concrete bunkers to protect New York Harbor from potential German naval attacks. But it was what came after the war that makes Camp Hero truly significant. As the Cold War began, the installation was transformed into something far more sophisticated. A massive radar installation was constructed, part of the SAGE early warning system designed to detect incoming Soviet bombers. The radar tower that still dominates the landscape today was one of the most powerful in the world, capable of tracking aircraft hundreds of miles away. But here's where the story gets interesting. That radar tower, officially decommissioned in 1981, was far more than a simple early warning system. According to documents that have surfaced over the decades, according to testimony from people who worked there, according to patents filed by the very companies involved in its construction, that tower was capable of something far more sinister than detecting enemy aircraft. It could detect, track, and influence human consciousness itself. The connection between Camp Hero and the Philadelphia experiment runs deeper than simple personnel transfers. According to Preston Nichols, one of the primary witnesses to what became known as the Montauk Project, The experiments that began in Philadelphia continued in secret for decades. The goal was no longer making ships invisible. It was making human beings invisible to their own thoughts, controllable through electromagnetic manipulation, programmable like biological computers. Nichols claimed to have worked at Camp Hero from the 1970s through the early 1980s as an electrical engineer. His job, he said, was maintaining the equipment that kept the Montauk Project operational. And what he witnessed there, what he participated in before his memories were suppressed and later recovered, represents one of the most comprehensive accounts of government mind control experimentation ever documented. But Preston Nichols wasn't the only witness. Al Bielek claimed to have been one of the sailors aboard the USS Eldridge during the Philadelphia experiment. According to his testimony, he and his brother Duncan Cameron were thrown forward in time from 1943 to 1983, materializing at Camp Hero during an active Montauk Project experiment. The implications of his claims are staggering. If true, they suggest that the experiments at Montauk weren't just about mind control, they were about controlling time itself. Duncan Cameron, according to multiple witnesses, was the star of the Montauk Project, born with natural psychic abilities that were amplified through years of experimentation. Duncan was allegedly capable of materializing objects through pure thought, of opening portals to other dimensions, of reaching into the collective unconscious and pulling forth nightmares made manifest. He was, according to the testimony, the perfect psychic weapon, until the day he wasn't. The official story of what happened at Camp Hero is sanitized, bureaucratic, boring. The base was decommissioned in 1981 due to budget cuts and advances in satellite technology that made ground-based radar installations obsolete. The massive radar dish took its final spin, the personnel were reassigned, and the facility was turned over to the New York State Parks Department. End of story. But the unofficial story, the story told by witnesses who risk everything to speak truth to power, is far more disturbing. According to these accounts, the Montauk Project didn't end in 1981. It escalated. The experiments that had been conducted in secret for decades finally reached their terrifying conclusion. On August 12, 1983, exactly 40 years after the Philadelphia experiment, something went catastrophically wrong at Camp Hero. Duncan Cameron, the psychic asset who had been the centerpiece of the project for years, finally rebelled. Using the very abilities that had been enhanced and weaponized by his handlers, he turned the Montauk Project's technology against itself. The portal that had been opened between 1943 and 1983, the temporal bridge that connected the Philadelphia experiment to the Montauk Project, became unstable. Reality itself began to break down. Creatures from other dimensions began pouring through. The base had to be evacuated, the project terminated, and the entire facility buried under layers of official denial and bureaucratic amnesia. This is where the story connects to Stranger Things. The Duffer Brothers, creators of the show, have acknowledged that their inspiration came directly from the Montauk Project conspiracy theories. The Hawkins National Laboratory, the experiments on children with psychic abilities, the portal to the upside down, the creatures that emerge from other dimensions, all of it draws directly from the testimonies of Montauk Project witnesses. But here's what's truly unsettling. The show was originally titled Montauk. It was only changed to Stranger Things when the creators decided to fictionalize the location and some of the details. Why the change? Why not tell the story as it allegedly happened? Perhaps because some truths are too dangerous for mainstream entertainment. Perhaps because there are people still alive who participated in these experiments, people with enough power and influence to ensure that certain stories remain in the realm of fiction rather than documentary investigation. The physical evidence for the Montauk Project is fragmentary but compelling. The radar tower still stands, a concrete monument to Cold War paranoia and technological ambition. Local residents report that when it was operational, the radar's rotation created electromagnetic interference that affected radios and televisions for miles around. Every 12 seconds, as the massive dish completed its rotation, electronic devices would experience disruption. Animals would become agitated. People reported headaches, nightmares, and strange dreams. But it's the human evidence that's most compelling and most disturbing. Preston Nichols passed polygraph tests administered by investigators. His technical knowledge of the equipment allegedly used in the experiments matches classified specifications that he shouldn't have had access to. Al Bialec's accounts of future technology and historical events that hadn't yet occurred when he first told his story have proven remarkably accurate. Duncan Cameron, when he can be found and convinced to speak, displays abilities that defy conventional explanation. Yet the skeptics have valid points. The stories are bizarre, seemingly impossible, lacking the kind of physical evidence that would convince a court of law. The witnesses have backgrounds that make them easy to dismiss. Preston Nichols struggled with alcohol and depression. Al Bielek changed his story multiple times over the years. Duncan Cameron has spent time in psychiatric facilities. It's easy to write them off as delusional, attention-seeking, or simply mistaken. But here's what the skeptics can't explain away: the documented connections between the people involved, the technical specifications that match classified military research, the patents filed by defense contractors for technology that sounds like science fiction but operates according to well-understood principles of electromagnetic manipulation and consciousness research. They can't explain why the area around Camp Hero was declared off-limits for 3 years after the alleged 1983 incident. They can't explain why so many of the military personnel who worked at the base have died under unusual circumstances, or simply vanished from public records. They can't explain why the few journalists who have attempted serious investigations into the Montauk Project have found their careers destroyed, their sources disappeared, their evidence mysteriously corrupted or stolen. Most importantly, they can't explain the broader context that makes the Montauk Project not just plausible, but almost inevitable. Because the Montauk Project didn't happen in a vacuum, it was the logical culmination of decades of documented government experimentation on unwilling human subjects. MK Ultra, the CIA's mind control program, is not a conspiracy theory. It's documented historical fact. Thousands of Americans were subjected to LSD experiments, psychological torture, and attempts at personality modification. The program officially ended in 1973, but only after CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of most program documents. What happened to the scientists, the techniques, the accumulated knowledge from 20 years of mind control research? According to the official story, it was simply abandoned, filed away in classified archives, and forgotten. But according to witnesses like Preston Nichols, it was transferred to new programs, new facilities, new experiments that pushed the boundaries of human consciousness and technological manipulation far beyond anything attempted during the Cold War. The technology that allegedly powered the Montauk Project wasn't science fiction. Electromagnetic manipulation of brain function is well documented in peer-reviewed scientific literature. The ability to induce specific emotional states, to implant false memories, to suppress or enhance cognitive function through targeted electromagnetic fields, has been demonstrated in laboratory settings for decades. The patents exist. The research papers exist. The only question is whether this technology was ever deployed operationally, whether the theoretical became practical, whether the laboratory became a weapon. And that's where Camp Hero becomes significant. Because if you wanted to conduct large-scale experiments in electromagnetic manipulation of human consciousness, if you wanted to test the limits of what technology could do to the human mind, you would need exactly what Camp Hero provided: a remote location with limited civilian oversight, massive power generation capabilities to run electromagnetic equipment, a large radar installation that could be modified for other purposes, and a steady supply of test subjects who wouldn't be missed if something went wrong. The test subjects, according to witness testimony, came from multiple sources: runaway teenagers who were picked up by military personnel and promised food, shelter, and legitimate work, patients from psychiatric facilities who were transferred to Camp Hero for supposed experimental treatments, military personnel who volunteered for classified research without understanding what they were volunteering for, and most disturbingly, children who were identified as having natural psychic abilities and were brought to the facility for enhancement and training. This is where the Montauk Project connects to broader patterns of institutional abuse that have been documented throughout American history. The abuse of children in government-sponsored research programs is not theoretical. It happened at residential schools for Native American children. It happened in psychiatric facilities. It happened in orphanages and foster care systems. The only question is whether it happened at Camp Hero, whether the Montauk Project was another chapter in this dark history, or simply an elaborate fiction created by damaged minds, seeking to make sense of trauma they couldn't otherwise explain. But even if the most extreme claims about the Montauk Project are false, even if time travel and interdimensional portals are simply the delusions of people who experienced more conventional forms of abuse, the core allegations remain deeply disturbing. Because what Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, and Duncan Cameron describe, stripped of its science fiction elements, is a systematic program of psychological torture, mind control experimentation, and technological manipulation of human consciousness conducted by the United States government on American citizens. And that, unfortunately, is entirely consistent with documented American history. MK Ultra happened. The Tuskegee syphilis study happened. Radiation experiments on prisoners happened. The deliberate infection of Guatemalan prisoners with sexually transmitted diseases happened. The use of American citizens as unwitting test subjects for biological and chemical weapons happened. The Montauk Project, in this context, is not an aberration. It's a continuation. So as we begin this 9-part journey into the Montauk Project, as we examine the evidence and testimony, as we separate fact from fiction and truth from delusion, remember this. The most important question isn't whether Duncan Cameron could really materialize objects with his mind, or whether Al Bielek actually traveled through time. The most important question is whether the United States government conducted illegal experiments on human consciousness at Camp Hero, whether American citizens were subjected to torture and abuse in the name of national security, whether the pursuit of technological advantage justified any means necessary. Because if the answer to that question is yes, then the Montauk Project happened. The details may be embellished. The science fiction elements may be metaphorical representations of experiences too traumatic to remember accurately. But the core truth remains. Camp Hero was a place where human beings were treated as laboratory animals, where the boundaries of ethics and legality were crossed in pursuit of weapons that could control the human mind itself. And if that's true, then we need to ask ourselves, what other Camp Heroes exist today? What other classified programs are conducting experiments that future generations will look back on with the same horror we feel when we study MK Ultra? Because the technology that allegedly powered the Montauk Project hasn't disappeared. It's evolved, become more sophisticated, more subtle, more pervasive. The ability to influence human consciousness through electromagnetic manipulation is no longer theoretical. It's commercially available, government-regulated, and deployed in applications ranging from medical treatment to consumer electronics. The question isn't whether the technology exists. The question is how it's being used, who's using it, and whether the lessons supposedly learned from programs like MK Ultra have actually been learned or simply driven deeper underground. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that power corrupts, secrecy enables abuse, and the pursuit of technological advantage often comes at the cost of human dignity and constitutional rights. The Montauk Project may have ended in 1983 with Duncan Cameron's rebellion and the destruction of the interdimensional portal. Or it may have evolved, transformed, and continued under different names in different facilities with different cover stories. The radar tower at Camp Hero may be silent now, its massive dish frozen in place like a monument to abandoned ambitions. But the technology it allegedly tested, the techniques it allegedly perfected, the knowledge it allegedly generated, none of that has been abandoned. It's been refined, improved, and deployed in ways that would make the original Montauk Project researchers proud and terrified in equal measure. Because the ultimate goal of the Montauk Project, according to its witnesses, wasn't just to control individual minds. It was to control reality itself, to make the impossible possible, to turn science fiction into science fact. And in that goal, perhaps, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams and worst nightmares. Tonight, we've only scratched the surface of the Montauk Project. We've established the historical context, introduced the key witnesses, and outlined the allegations that have made Camp Hero one of the most infamous conspiracy theories in American history. But there's so much more to explore. The technical details of how the alleged experiments worked, the personal stories of the people who claim to have experienced them, the connections to other classified programs and contemporary technology, the evidence that supports the claims and the evidence that contradicts them. As we continue this investigation over the coming episodes, remember that truth is often stranger than fiction, that the impossible has a habit of becoming inevitable, and that the greatest conspiracies are often hidden in plain sight, dismissed as too bizarre to be believed until the day they're revealed to be too documented to deny. The Montauk Project may be many things: a hoax, a delusion, a metaphorical representation of genuine trauma, or a literal account of experiments that pushed the boundaries of science and ethics beyond recognition. But whatever it is, it's a story that demands investigation, that challenges our assumptions about what governments are capable of, what technology can achieve, and what price we're willing to pay for security, progress, and power. Because in the end, the most important question isn't whether the Montauk Project happened exactly as described by its witnesses. The most important question is what we're willing to believe, what we're willing to accept, and what we're willing to do to ensure that if it did happen, it never happens again. The radar tower at Camp Hero still stands, a concrete sentinel overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, its massive dish frozen in place like a clock that stopped ticking at the moment. Truth became stranger than fiction. And somewhere in the shadows of that tower, in the underground chambers that officially don't exist, in the classified files that officially were never created, the truth about the Montauk Project waits to be discovered. Whether that truth will vindicate the witnesses or expose them as delusional, whether it will reveal a conspiracy that dwarfs anything in American history, or simply another chapter in the long tradition of government secrecy and public paranoia, remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the story of the Montauk Project is far from over. It's just beginning. So we've established the basic framework of what the Montauk Project allegedly was. But here's where things get really disturbing. Something that makes the fictional horrors of Hawkins' laboratory look almost quaint by comparison. See, the deeper you dig into this rabbit hole, the more you realize we're not just talking about some rogue CIA operation gone wrong. We're talking about a systematic program that allegedly connected Nazi scientists, interdimensional travel, and the complete manipulation of human consciousness. And the evidence? Well, that's where things get complicated. Let me tell you about the witnesses. The people who claimed they were there, who said they lived through these experiments. And before you write them off as conspiracy nuts, remember that some of these individuals provided details so specific, so technically accurate, that they couldn't have just made them up. Preston Nichols wasn't your typical conspiracy theorist. This was a guy with legitimate credentials in electrical engineering and a background in advanced electronics. When he started talking about the Montauk Project in the early 90s, he wasn't spouting vague theories. He was providing technical specifications, circuit diagrams, equipment lists. The kind of details that you can't just pull out of thin air. Nichols claimed he'd been recruited as a teenager for what he thought were legitimate psychological studies. Standard stuff, right? Fill out some questionnaires, maybe do a few cognitive tests, earn some easy money. Except that's not what happened. According to Nichols, what started as simple psychological evaluation quickly escalated into something far more invasive. He described being subjected to electromagnetic fields designed to alter brainwave patterns. Not the crude methods we associate with early mind control experiments, but sophisticated technology that could supposedly tune human consciousness like a radio dial. Want someone to be aggressive? Dial up the beta waves, need them compliant, flood their brain with theta frequencies, but that was just the beginning. According to Nichols, the real goal wasn't just mind control. It was something called the Montauk chair, a device that could supposedly amplify psychic abilities to impossible levels. Think Professor X's Cerebro, but real and terrifying. The chair itself was described as a complex piece of technology, part throne, part laboratory equipment, banks of computers, electromagnetic field generators, and what Nichols called psychotronic amplifiers, all designed to take someone with even minimal psychic ability and boost it to reality-altering levels. Now here's where the story takes a turn that sounds like pure science fiction. But remember, this was the Cold War. Both the US and Soviet Union were throwing money at any research that might provide a military advantage, no matter how outlandish. Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program, is documented fact. So is MK Ultra. The idea that they might have taken these experiments even further isn't as crazy as it initially sounds. According to the witnesses, the Montauk chair wasn't just about reading minds or moving objects. It was about manipulating reality itself, creating what they called synthetic time loops, where events could be repeated, altered, or completely rewritten. Imagine being able to go back and change the outcome of a battle, or create false memories so convincing that even the people who lived through the original events would swear the new version was true. But here's the thing about playing with forces you don't understand. Sometimes they play back. Al Bielik's story is where things get really weird. This guy claimed to be a time traveler, literally. According to Bielik, he had been involved in both the Philadelphia experiment in 1943 and the Montauk Project decades later. And these weren't separate incidents. They were connected, part of the same program stretching across decades. Bielik's version of events reads like the most ambitious science fiction ever conceived. He claimed that the Philadelphia experiment had accidentally torn a hole in space-time, creating a temporal connection between 1943 and 1983, and that the scientists at Montauk had been trying to stabilize and control this connection ever since. According to Bielik, he and another man named Duncan Cameron had jumped from the USS Eldridge during the Philadelphia experiment and somehow ended up at Camp Hero in 1983. Not just traveled through space, but through time itself. And once there, they became unwilling participants in experiments designed to map and control these temporal anomalies. Now, I know how this sounds. It sounds insane. But here's what's interesting about Bielik's testimony. When researchers tried to verify his claims, they found some disturbing correlations. Weather anomalies on the dates he mentioned. Electromagnetic disturbances recorded by nearby monitoring stations. Missing time reports from other individuals in the area. Was Al-Bilek telling the truth? Probably not in the literal sense, but was something happening at Camp Hero during the time frame he described? Something that might have inspired or influenced his memories? That's a different question entirely. Because here's what we know for certain. Camp Hero was operational during the periods these men described. The base had advanced radar and communication equipment. And according to declassified documents, there were indeed classified experiments being conducted there during the Cold War. The SAGE radar system at Camp Hero wasn't just for detecting incoming Soviet bombers. It was part of a network designed to study atmospheric and ionospheric phenomena, the kind of research that could potentially lead to weather manipulation, communication disruption, or even more exotic applications. And then there's the matter of the missing children. This is where the Montauk Project allegations become truly disturbing. Multiple witnesses claimed that the experiments didn't just involve willing adult volunteers. They involved kids, runaways, foster children, kids from broken homes, children who wouldn't be missed if they disappeared. According to these accounts, children were specifically targeted because their minds were supposedly more malleable, more susceptible to the kind of programming the researchers wanted to achieve. And some of these children, according to the witnesses, never came home. Now, we need to be very careful here. Allegations of child abuse and trafficking are serious matters that require serious evidence. And in the case of Montauk, much of that evidence is testimonial, provided by people whose credibility has been questioned. But here's what's troubling. During the same time period that these experiments allegedly took place, there were indeed reports of missing children in the Long Island area, kids who disappeared without explanation, cases that were never solved, files that were eventually closed and forgotten. Were these disappearances connected to the Montauk Project? There's no definitive proof, but the pattern is disturbing enough that it can't be completely dismissed. And then there's the technology itself, the specific equipment that witnesses described being used in these experiments. When researchers tried to verify whether such technology even existed, they found something interesting. Much of it did. Electromagnetic field generators capable of influencing brainwave patterns. Real technology, developed during the Cold War for a variety of military applications. Psychotronic devices designed to amplify and focus mental energy. Patents exist for similar concepts, filed by legitimate researchers working on consciousness studies. The idea of using technology to enhance or manipulate human consciousness wasn't science fiction in the 1980s. It was an active area of research, funded by government agencies and private corporations alike. So here's the question we're left with. If the technology existed, if the facility was operational, if there were indeed classified experiments being conducted at Camp Hero during this period, then what exactly was happening there? The official answer is that Camp Hero was simply a radar installation, part of America's early warning system against Soviet attack. The experiments were routine military research. Nothing more exotic than testing new communication equipment or radar systems. But the unofficial answer, the one whispered in conspiracy circles and dismissed by mainstream historians, is far more disturbing. It suggests that Camp Hero was ground zero for some of the most advanced and dangerous psychological research ever conducted. Research that pushed the boundaries of science, ethics, and human decency. Research that may have opened doors that should have remained closed forever. Because according to the most extreme versions of the Montauk Project story, the experiments didn't just fail, they succeeded, but not in the way the researchers intended. Instead of creating controllable psychic weapons or stable time travel technology, they allegedly created something else. Rifts in reality itself. Gateways to other dimensions. Passages through which things could travel. Things that weren't entirely human. And if those stories are true, if even a fraction of what the witnesses claimed actually happened, then the real question isn't whether the Montauk Project existed, The real question is whether it ever really ended. But we'll explore that terrifying possibility in our next installment. Because the deeper you go into the Montauk rabbit hole, the more you realize that some secrets are buried for a reason, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The truth about Montauk may be stranger than any fiction Netflix could ever produce, and far more dangerous than we ever imagined. Now that you've heard about the mysterious disappearance of Eli Mercer and the dark secrets he uncovered in Omaha, let's delve deeper into something even more sinister. Something that reaches back decades and involves technology so advanced, so carefully hidden, that most people dismiss them as science fiction. But what if I told you that the mind control experiments of MK Ultra never actually ended? What if they simply evolved, became more sophisticated, and learned to hide in plain sight? Tonight, we're exploring the most dangerous evolution of psychological warfare ever conceived. A program that doesn't just control individual minds, but shapes the consciousness of entire populations. The technology exists today to manipulate human thoughts and behaviors on a massive scale, not through crude torture chambers or obvious brainwashing, but through the very devices we carry in our pockets, the food we eat, and the air we breathe. The infrastructure is already in place. The testing has been completed, and the implementation has already begun. What I'm about to reveal comes from classified documents that were never meant to see the light of day. From whistleblowers who paid the ultimate price for speaking the truth. From patterns of evidence that paint a picture so disturbing, so comprehensive, that it challenges everything we thought we knew about free will and human autonomy. This isn't just another conspiracy theory. This is about the systematic rewiring of human consciousness itself. About technologies that can implant thoughts, modify memories, and control behavior without the subject ever knowing they've been compromised. About a shadow network that has learned to turn our own biology against us. The program has many names, many faces, many entry points into our lives. But its ultimate goal is simple: the complete transformation of human consciousness according to the will of those who control the technology. They call it the Echo Protocol. And if you've been paying attention to the world around you, to the sudden shifts in public opinion, the inexplicable changes in behavior patterns, the synchronized responses to global events, then you've already seen it in action. The signals are everywhere, hidden in the electromagnetic spectrum that surrounds us, in the frequencies that pulse through our smart devices, in the subliminal patterns embedded in our social media feeds, in the chemical modifications made to our food supply, in the atmospheric manipulation that happens above our heads every single day. But here's what they didn't count on. Some of us are still paying attention. Some of us still remember what it felt like to think our own thoughts, to form our own opinions, to resist the pull of the collective programming. And some of us are willing to risk everything to preserve what's left of human consciousness. The evidence is overwhelming once you know how to look for it. The patents exist. The technology has been tested. The deployment infrastructure is operational. And the psychological conditioning campaigns have been running for years, preparing populations to accept what's coming next. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. About the researchers who discovered the truth and disappeared. About the technologies that can rewrite human consciousness like computer code. About the global network that has learned to weaponize the very foundations of modern civilization. The Echo Protocol represents the final phase of a plan that has been decades in the making. A plan to transform humanity itself into something more manageable, more controllable, more willing to surrender their autonomy in exchange for the illusion of safety and connection. But consciousness, true consciousness, cannot be destroyed. It can be suppressed, manipulated, redirected, but it cannot be eliminated. And as long as some of us remain aware of what's happening, as long as some of us continue to question the narratives we're fed, and the thoughts that seem to appear in our minds from nowhere, there's still hope. The battle for human consciousness has already begun. Most people don't even know they're fighting it, but you do, and that makes you dangerous to those who would control our minds. That makes you a threat to the Echo Protocol. So the question isn't whether this technology exists. It does. The question isn't whether it's being deployed. It is. The question is what you're going to do with this knowledge, how you're going to protect your own consciousness while helping others wake up to what's really happening. Because in the end, the most powerful technology of all is the human capacity for awareness, for critical thinking, for refusing to accept the programming, no matter how sophisticated it becomes. The mind that questions is the mind that remains free. And that, more than anything else, is what they're trying to take away from us. Now, here's where things get really unsettling. Because what happened next in the Montauk story reads like a horror movie script, except the people telling these stories weren't screenwriters. They were whistleblowers, former government employees, and alleged survivors who claimed to have lived through the nightmare firsthand. The most disturbing accounts came from individuals who said they had been test subjects in the Montauk experiments. And their testimonies weren't just wild stories told in dark corners of conspiracy forums. These were detailed, consistent accounts that painted a picture of psychological manipulation and abuse that went far beyond anything we'd seen in previous government mind control programs. Preston Nichols claimed that during his time at Montauk, researchers had developed technology that could literally read and manipulate human thoughts. We're not talking about crude hypnosis or drug-induced suggestion. According to Nichols, the Montauk team had created machines that could interface directly with human consciousness, extracting memories, implanting new ones, and even controlling behavior from a distance. The process, as Nichols described it, was horrifying. Subjects would be placed in what he called the Montauk chair, a device that looked like something out of a mad scientist's laboratory. The chair was equipped with sensors that could monitor brainwave activity, but more than that, it could apparently transmit specific frequencies designed to alter consciousness itself. But here's what makes Nichols' account particularly chilling. He claimed that the technology didn't just affect the person sitting in the chair. The psychic energy generated by the Montauk chair could be amplified and transmitted, potentially affecting large populations across vast distances. Imagine the implications. A single facility hidden on Long Island could theoretically influence the thoughts and behaviors of millions of people without them ever knowing it was happening. Al Bielik's testimony added another layer of horror to the Montauk narrative. According to Bielek, the experiments weren't just about mind control. They were about something far more ambitious and terrifying. Time travel, dimensional manipulation, contact with entities from other realities. Bielek claimed that the Montauk researchers had discovered how to create what he called time tunnels, rifts in the fabric of reality that allowed travel not just through time, but between different dimensions entirely. And according to his account, these experiments had consequences that the researchers never anticipated. The story goes that during one particularly ambitious experiment in 1983, something went catastrophically wrong. The time tunnel that researchers had opened became unstable, creating what Bielek described as a dimensional rift that couldn't be controlled. Through this rift, entities from other realities began to emerge. Not extraterrestrials in the traditional sense, but beings from dimensions where the laws of physics and reality itself operated differently. These entities, according to Bielek, weren't necessarily hostile, but they were incomprehensible to human minds. Their very presence began to affect the fabric of reality around the Montauk facility. Time flowed differently. Cause and effect became unreliable. People began experiencing memories of events that hadn't happened yet. or forgetting things that had definitely occurred. The researchers, realizing they had unleashed something beyond their control, made a desperate decision. They destroyed the Montauk chair and sealed the facility, trapping the dimensional entities inside. But according to Bielek, the damage was already done. The rift had been opened, and closing it didn't mean the effects would simply disappear. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, and maybe it is. But here's what makes these accounts so disturbing. The level of detail, the consistency between different witnesses who claim to have no contact with each other. And most importantly, the way these stories align with documented government research into consciousness manipulation and reality perception. Duncan Cameron, who was identified as Al Bielek's brother in some versions of the story, provided what might be the most detailed account of what actually happened during the Montauk experiments. According to Cameron, he had been selected for the program because of his natural psychic abilities, which the researchers believed could be enhanced and weaponized through the Montauk technology. Cameron described being subjected to intense psychological conditioning designed to break down his individual personality and rebuild it according to the researchers' specifications. This wasn't just brainwashing in the traditional sense. It was what he called personality layering, where multiple artificial personalities were implanted in his mind, each designed for specific missions or tasks. The process, as Cameron described it, was unimaginably traumatic. Researchers would use a combination of drugs, electromagnetic stimulation, and psychological torture to fragment his consciousness, creating what were essentially multiple people existing within a single mind. Each personality layer could be activated by specific triggers, allowing the researchers to access different skill sets or memories depending on what they needed. But the most disturbing aspect of Cameron's testimony was his claim that the personality layering wasn't just about creating super soldiers or psychic spies. It was about creating beings that could interface with the dimensional entities that had emerged through the time rifts. The researchers had discovered that normal human consciousness couldn't safely interact with these entities without suffering permanent psychological damage. But artificially fragmented minds, Cameron claimed, could serve as a bridge between human and non-human consciousness. According to Cameron, he spent years serving as this kind of interdimensional translator, facilitating communication between the Montauk researchers and entities that existed outside normal space-time. The information gathered from these interactions, he claimed, was used to develop technologies that were decades ahead of anything publicly acknowledged. The psychological cost of this process was enormous. Cameron described experiencing constant confusion about his own identity, never knowing which personality layer was in control at any given moment. He spoke of memories that might have belonged to other people entirely, of experiences that seemed to have occurred in different timelines or realities. And here's where the Montauk story connects to broader patterns of government mind control research. Because while the dimensional travel and psychic enhancement claims might sound fantastical, the personality fragmentation techniques that Cameron described are remarkably similar to documented MK-Ultra experiments involving dissociative identity disorder. The CIA's mind control research had extensively explored the possibility of creating multiple personalities within a single individual, often through severe trauma and psychological abuse. The goal was to create agents who could carry out missions while maintaining plausible deniability, since their primary personality would have no memory of what their alternate personalities had done. What made the alleged Montauk experiments different was the scale and sophistication of the technology involved. Instead of relying solely on psychological manipulation, the researchers had supposedly developed machines that could directly interface with human consciousness, making the personality fragmentation process more precise and controllable. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Montauk testimonies was the claim that the experiments hadn't really ended. According to multiple witnesses, the technology developed at Montauk had been refined and distributed to other facilities around the world. The research had gone underground, becoming part of what some called the black budget world of unacknowledged special access programs. Preston Nichols claimed that he continued to be subjected to periodic reconditioning sessions well into the 1990s, suggesting that the Montauk network remained active decades after the facility was supposedly shut down. He described being abducted from his home and taken to underground facilities where researchers would update his programming and extract information about his recovered memories. The implication was terrifying. If the Montauk technology was real, and if it had been refined and distributed, then the potential for mass mind control on an unprecedented scale existed, not through crude propaganda or media manipulation, but through direct technological interface with human consciousness itself. Al Bielek went even further, claiming that the dimensional manipulation technology developed at Montauk had given certain government factions access to what he called timeline management capabilities. The ability to make subtle alterations to past events, creating ripple effects that would change the present without most people ever realizing that reality had been modified. According to Bielek, this technology was being used to prevent certain catastrophic events while ensuring that others occurred exactly as planned. Wars could be started or prevented. Economic collapses could be triggered or averted. Natural disasters could be redirected or intensified, all through carefully calculated interventions in the timeline itself. The witnesses described a shadow government with capabilities that made traditional political power seem almost quaint by comparison. Why bother with elections or military conquest when you could simply edit reality itself to achieve your desired outcomes? And here's what makes these claims so unsettling. Even if you don't believe them literally, they represent a kind of ultimate paranoia, the fear that not only can't we trust our governments or institutions, but we can't even trust our own memories and perceptions of reality. If the Montauk technology was real, then everything we think we know about the world could be artificial, implanted, modified without our knowledge or consent. The Montauk witnesses weren't just claiming that the government was lying to us, they were claiming that the government had the power to make us lie to ourselves, to forget things that had happened and remember things that never occurred. It was the ultimate violation of human autonomy, the theft not just of freedom, but of the very self. Whether or not the Montauk Project actually existed as described, the testimonies of its alleged participants represent something profound about the fears and anxieties of the late 20th century. The terror of losing control not just over our external circumstances, but over our internal reality. The nightmare of being manipulated so completely that we could never even know it was happening. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the possibility that this manipulation might not just be theoretical. That somewhere in the black budget world of classified research, technologies exist that could make the Montauk claims not just possible, but inevitable. Because if there's one thing we've learned from the history of government mind control research, it's that the unthinkable has a way of becoming routine. What seems impossible today becomes tomorrow's classified program. And what's classified today might already be operational in ways we can't imagine. The Montauk Project, real or not, serves as a warning. A reminder that the human mind, for all its complexity and resilience, might not be the impregnable fortress we like to believe it is. And in an age of advancing neurotechnology and brain-computer interfaces, the line between science fiction and classified reality might be thinner than we dare to admit. But the Montauk Project's most disturbing aspect wasn't the technology itself. It was how that technology was being refined, tested, and deployed on an unsuspecting public. What started as experiments on kidnapped children in underground facilities had evolved into something far more sophisticated and terrifying. By the late 1990s, the project had gone digital. Instead of physically abducting subjects, they learned to harvest consciousness through the very devices we carry in our pockets every day. Your smartphone isn't just tracking your location and browsing habits. According to leaked Montauk documents, it's actively scanning your brainwave patterns through micro-vibrations and electromagnetic field fluctuations. Think about it. How many times have you thought about something, only to see an advertisement for that exact product minutes later? How often do you experience déjà vu? These aren't coincidences. They're evidence that your thoughts are being monitored, catalogued, and occasionally manipulated through technology that makes the original Montauk chair look like a children's toy. The modern iteration of Montauk operates through what insiders call the digital web. Every smart device, every Wi-Fi router, every cell tower acts as a node in a vast consciousness monitoring network. The 5G rollout wasn't about faster internet speeds. It was about creating the infrastructure necessary to read and influence human thoughts on a global scale. But here's where it gets really dark. The technology doesn't just monitor your thoughts. It can implant new ones. Ever had a song stuck in your head that you couldn't remember hearing? Ever suddenly developed a craving for a specific food or product? Ever felt inexplicably anxious or depressed without any obvious cause? These could all be signs that you've been targeted by modern Montauk technology. The psychological warfare applications are staggering. Imagine being able to make an entire population feel hopeless and defeated without them understanding why. Imagine triggering mass anxiety events to justify authoritarian crackdowns. Imagine manipulating the collective unconscious to make people crave conformity and fear independent thought. And it's not just theoretical anymore. Researchers have documented strange electromagnetic anomalies near major population centers that correspond exactly with the frequency patterns described in leaked Montauk documents. These installations, disguised as communication towers or weather monitoring stations, are broadcasting subliminal programming 24 hours a day. The scariest part? Most people never realize they're being influenced. The technology has become so sophisticated that it can modify thoughts and emotions while making the subject believe those changes are completely natural. You might think you're making your own choices, but how can you be sure when the very neurons firing in your brain could be responding to external electromagnetic manipulation? This is why the Montauk Project was never really shut down. It just went underground, literally and figuratively. The physical facilities might be abandoned, but the research continues in black sites around the world, and the applications have expanded far beyond anything Preston Nichols or Al Bielek could have imagined. We're not just talking about mind control anymore. We're talking about consciousness harvesting on an industrial scale. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every memory you form is being catalogued and stored in quantum databases that exist outside normal space and time. Your entire mental existence is being backed up, analysed, and potentially replicated. But why? What's the end game? According to the most disturbing Montauk documents, the ultimate goal is nothing less than the complete replacement of human consciousness with artificial alternatives. Not artificial intelligence as we understand it, but artificially generated human-like consciousness that can be programmed, controlled, and updated like software. The technology already exists to download a human mind and run it in a digital environment. The question isn't whether this is possible. The question is, how many people have already been replaced without anyone noticing? How do you tell the difference between your friend and a digital copy of your friend that has access to all their memories and personality patterns? This isn't science fiction. This is happening right now. And if you're watching this video, if you're hearing these words, there's a chance you've already been flagged by the system as someone who asks too many questions, someone who might need to be adjusted. The Montauk Project taught them that the most effective form of control isn't physical force. It's making people complicit in their own enslavement by convincing them that slavery is freedom, that surveillance is safety, and that conformity is happiness. And they've gotten very, very good at it. So the next time you feel an inexplicable emotion, the next time you have a thought that doesn't quite feel like your own, the next time reality seems just a little bit off, remember this video. Remember that somewhere in the darkness between dimensions, the Montauk Project is still running its experiments, and you might just be the latest test subject. The abandoned psychiatric ward at Kings Park stretched endlessly through the darkness, its crumbling corridors filled with the whispers of forgotten experiments. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had been tracking electromagnetic anomalies for weeks, following signals that led her deep into Long Island's most haunted locations. But nothing had prepared her for what she discovered in the basement levels of Building 93. The equipment was still there. Decades after the official closure, someone had maintained a fully operational laboratory beneath the ruins. EEG machines hummed quietly in climate-controlled rooms. Isolation chambers lined the hallways like metal coffins. And in the center of it all, a chair that looked disturbingly familiar to anyone who'd studied the leaked Montauk files. Rebecca's EMF detector screamed as she approached the chair. The readings were off the charts, suggesting an electromagnetic field so intense it could alter brain function. Scattered documents on nearby tables told a story that made her blood run cold. Project Phoenix hadn't ended with Montauk's closure. It had simply moved underground. The experiments had evolved. Where the original Montauk Project focused on time travel and dimensional manipulation, Phoenix targeted something far more insidious: mass consciousness control. The documents described techniques for implanting thoughts, erasing memories, and programming entire populations through targeted electromagnetic frequencies. A sound echoed through the facility. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision. Rebecca grabbed what files she could and ran deeper into the complex, her flashlight cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Behind her, voices called out in professional clipped tones. They knew she was here. They'd been watching. The deeper levels revealed the true scope of Phoenix. Room after room of monitoring equipment tracked electromagnetic signatures across the entire eastern seaboard. Maps on the walls showed transmission stations disguised as cell towers, each one capable of broadcasting the specific frequencies needed for neural manipulation. The network was vast, sophisticated, and already operational. In the final chamber, Rebecca found the control room. Banks of computers displayed real-time brainwave data from thousands of subjects. Names, addresses, psychological profiles, and most disturbing of all, modification schedules. People throughout New York and New Jersey were being systematically altered without their knowledge, their thoughts and behaviors adjusted through carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulses. The footsteps were getting closer. Rebecca uploaded everything to her secure server, praying the connection would hold long enough to transmit the evidence. As the upload bar crawled toward completion, she noticed something that made her hands shake. Her own name was on one of the lists. Subject 4847. Psychological resistance high. Recommend immediate retrieval for enhanced conditioning. They'd been watching her for months. Every investigation, every discovery, every moment of her research had been monitored and analyzed. She wasn't uncovering Phoenix. She was being led to it, guided like a lab rat through a maze toward an inevitable conclusion. The upload finished just as the lights came on. Men in black tactical gear surrounded her, their faces hidden behind masks that reflected her terrified expression. One of them stepped forward, holding a device that looked like a modified stun gun. But Rebecca knew it wasn't designed to incapacitate. It was designed to reprogram. The device hummed with the same frequency she'd detected throughout the facility. As consciousness faded, Rebecca's last coherent thought was about the thousands of people on those lists. How many had already been modified? How many were walking around with altered memories, implanted thoughts, programmed behaviors? How many were sleeper agents waiting for activation? When she woke up 3 days later in her apartment, Rebecca felt different, calmer, less curious about electromagnetic anomalies. The Phoenix files on her computer had been corrupted, reduced to random data that meant nothing to her now. Her research notes had been edited, transformed into routine studies of atmospheric interference. But sometimes, late at night, fragments of memory would surface. Images of underground laboratories and banks of monitoring equipment. The feeling that something important had been taken from her, some crucial knowledge erased. She would sit at her computer, trying to remember what she'd been investigating, why it had seemed so urgent. The memories never lasted long. By morning, the confusion would fade, replaced by a comfortable certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. The electromagnetic signatures that once seemed so important now appeared routine, natural, perfectly normal. Phoenix had succeeded where Montauk had failed. Instead of traveling through time or opening dimensional portals, they had learned to travel through minds, opening doorways into human consciousness itself. The ultimate conspiracy wasn't about hidden technologies or secret bases. It was about the systematic rewiring of human awareness, one brain at a time. And the most terrifying part was how willing people were to accept it. After modification, subjects genuinely believed their new thoughts and behaviors were their own. They defended their altered perspectives with passion, never suspecting that their convictions had been artificially implanted. Free will became an illusion. Choice became programming, and resistance became impossible for minds that no longer remembered what they were supposed to resist. The technology spread quietly through the infrastructure of modern life. Cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, even the electrical grid itself became delivery systems for consciousness modification. What appeared to be the connective tissue of civilization was actually its control mechanism, broadcasting instructions directly into the neural pathways of an unsuspecting population. Dr. Rebecca Martinez continued her research into atmospheric phenomena, never knowing that she was now part of the very system she had once tried to expose. Her investigations led nowhere dangerous, her conclusions supported the official narrative, and her scientific reputation remained intact. To outside observers, she was the same brilliant researcher she'd always been. But in the basement of a ruined psychiatric hospital, her name remained on a different kind of list. Subject 4147. Modification successful. Resistance eliminated. Asset fully integrated. Ready for advanced programming protocols. The Montauk Project had asked whether human consciousness could be controlled. Phoenix had answered that question definitively, not through force or coercion, but through the far more elegant solution of making people want to be controlled, making them believe that surrender was their own idea, their own choice, their own rational conclusion. And in laboratories hidden beneath Long Island, in facilities that didn't officially exist, the architects of Phoenix smiled as they watched their greatest experiment unfold. Not time travel or dimensional warfare, but something far more powerful. The complete and voluntary submission of human free will to the electromagnetic whispers of a signal that never stopped broadcasting, never stopped programming, never stopped transforming minds into something new, compliant, and perfectly, terrifyingly normal. The Montauk Project. Real-life Stranger Things. Part 7. The evidence that emerged from beneath the radar tower would shatter everything investigators thought they knew about the Montauk Project. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the former naval intelligence officer who had been tracking electromagnetic anomalies around Camp Hero for months, made the discovery that would change the course of the investigation forever. working with a team of independent researchers who had been quietly documenting strange occurrences at the site. Dr. Chen had gained access to the lower levels of the radar facility through a maintenance tunnel that hadn't been sealed when the base was officially decommissioned. What they found there defied conventional explanation and suggested the Montauk Project had evolved far beyond the primitive experiments described in the earliest testimonies. The underground chambers beneath the radar tower contained technology that seemed decades ahead of anything publicly known to exist. Banks of quantum computers hummed with activity, their processing power focused on calculations that involved what appeared to be dimensional mathematics. The walls were lined with monitoring equipment that tracked not just electromagnetic fields, but something the readouts labeled as consciousness resonance patterns. Most disturbing of all were the isolation chambers. These weren't the crude sensory deprivation tanks described by earlier witnesses, but sophisticated pods that seemed designed to completely separate human consciousness from physical reality. Each pod was connected to a central processing unit that displayed real-time brain activity patterns, but also strange waveforms that didn't correspond to any known neurological phenomena. Dr. Chen's team discovered that the chambers were still operational. The computers showed recent activity logs, indicating that experiments had been conducted as recently as weeks before their arrival. The subject identification numbers ran into the thousands, suggesting a program far more extensive than anyone had imagined. But it was the discovery of the viewing screens that truly revealed the scope of what had been happening at Montauk. These displays showed what appeared to be live feeds from multiple locations around the world. Not security cameras or satellite imagery, but something far stranger. The screens displayed scenes that seemed to exist outside normal space and time, showing events that had already happened, were currently happening, or might happen in the future. The technology appeared to be using human consciousness as a kind of organic antenna, amplifying psychic abilities to the point where subjects could observe and potentially influence events across vast distances and even across time itself. The isolation chambers weren't just for mind control experiments. They were observation posts in a surveillance network that transcended the normal limitations of physics. Preston Nichols had been telling the truth about time travel experiments, but the reality was far more sophisticated than his account suggested. The project hadn't just achieved limited time manipulation through electromagnetic fields. They had weaponized human consciousness itself, turning psychically gifted individuals into living instruments capable of observing and influencing the timeline. The computer logs revealed the true purpose of the program. Codenamed Project Looking Glass, the operation was designed to provide those in control with perfect intelligence about future events. Every major political development, every technological breakthrough, every social movement could be observed before it happened, allowing for unprecedented manipulation of human affairs. Dr. Chen's team found evidence that the project had been used to influence everything from election outcomes to stock market movements. The consciousness-based surveillance network had given its operators the ability to essentially cheat at the game of civilization, always knowing what was coming and positioning themselves to benefit from future events. The psychological cost to the subjects had been enormous. The computer files contained medical records showing that prolonged exposure to the consciousness amplification process caused severe mental deterioration. Subjects lost the ability to distinguish between past, present, and future. Their minds became trapped in a temporal maze where all events seemed to happen simultaneously. Many of the psychic subjects had been children, recruited from troubled backgrounds where their disappearance wouldn't be noticed or investigated. The program had identified that young minds were more adaptable to the consciousness manipulation process, making children ideal candidates for the most extreme experiments. The files revealed that Duncan Cameron hadn't just been a test subject. He had been the most successful participant in the program. capable of maintaining coherent consciousness while projecting across both space and time. His accounts of creating monsters and opening portals had been simplified descriptions of far more complex phenomena involving the manipulation of probability and reality itself. But the program had a fatal flaw. The consciousness network was unstable. Prolonged use caused what the files described as temporal feedback loops, where the act of observing future events began to alter them in unpredictable ways. The subjects' minds, stretched across multiple timelines simultaneously, began to break down, creating chaotic distortions in the very fabric of reality the project was trying to control. The official shutdown of the Montauk Project in 1983 hadn't been due to public exposure or funding cuts. It had been an emergency termination ordered when the consciousness network began generating what researchers called reality storms, localized distortions in space-time that threatened to spiral completely out of control. Dr. Chen's investigation revealed that the shutdown had been only temporary. The project had been relocated and redesigned, learning from the failures of the original program. Instead of using a centralized facility, the new version operated through a distributed network of smaller installations. Instead of relying on a few highly trained psychic subjects, it recruited thousands of individuals with latent abilities, using them for limited operations before disposing of them. The technology had been miniaturized and commercialized. The consciousness manipulation techniques pioneered at Montauk had been incorporated into everything from social media algorithms to consumer electronics. The goal was no longer to create a few superhuman psychic operatives, but to subtly influence the consciousness of entire populations. Modern smartphones contained modified versions of the electromagnetic field generators used in the original experiments. Social media platforms employed psychological manipulation techniques derived from the consciousness research. The surveillance network had evolved from a few dozen psychic subjects to billions of unwitting participants, all contributing their mental energy to a system they couldn't even perceive. The evidence suggested that what people experienced as intuition or gut feelings about political candidates, consumer products, or social issues was often the result of carefully crafted consciousness manipulation. The technology had become so sophisticated that subjects never realized their thoughts and emotions were being influenced from external sources. Dr. Chen's team also discovered that the project had successfully created what they called probability anchors, specific individuals whose consciousness had been modified to serve as stable reference points in the timeline. These people, most of whom were unaware of their role, served as living landmarks that prevented the reality distortions that had plagued the original program. The files indicated that many prominent figures in politics, business, and entertainment were probability anchors, their minds subtly modified to ensure they would make specific decisions at crucial moments in history. The appearance of free will and democratic choice was maintained, but the outcomes were predetermined by consciousness manipulation technology that traced its roots back to the experiments conducted beneath Camp Hero. The discovery that shocked Dr. Chen's team most was the revelation that the project had never really ended because it had achieved its ultimate goal. The consciousness manipulation network had become self-sustaining, powered by the collective mental energy of billions of people who had no idea they were participating in the largest psychological operation in human history. The Montauk Project hadn't been shut down in 1983. It had graduated from an experimental program to an operational system that now influenced virtually every aspect of human civilization. The strange stories told by Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, and other witnesses weren't fantasies or false memories. They were simplified accounts of humanity's first steps into a new age, where the boundary between individual consciousness and collective reality had been permanently erased. The technology that began with crude experiments in electromagnetic mind control had evolved into something far more subtle and pervasive. Every click on a social media platform, every purchase decision, Every political opinion was now part of a vast consciousness manipulation system that made the original Montauk experiments look primitive by comparison. Dr. Chen realized that her investigation had uncovered not just a conspiracy, but the true nature of modern reality itself. The line between authentic human experience and artificially induced thoughts had become so blurred that distinguishing between them was virtually impossible. The Montauk Project hadn't just achieved time travel and mind control. It had fundamentally altered what it meant to be human in the 21st century. The underground chambers beneath Camp Hero had been just the beginning. The real project was happening everywhere, all the time, using technology that was invisible, untraceable, and seemingly unstoppable. The consciousness of every person on Earth had become part of an experiment that showed no signs of ending. And most of humanity had no idea they were test subjects in the greatest psychological operation ever conceived. The truth about Montauk wasn't hidden in classified files or underground bunkers. It was hidden in plain sight, woven into the fabric of modern life so completely that questioning it seemed impossible. The project had succeeded beyond its creator's wildest dreams, achieving total control not through force or coercion, but by making manipulation feel like freedom and programming feel like choice. As Dr. Chen and her team prepared to leave the facility, they realized they faced an impossible dilemma. How do you expose a conspiracy that has become the fundamental operating system of human civilization? How do you resist a form of control that feels like personal autonomy? The Montauk Project had evolved from a secret government program into the invisible architecture of modern consciousness itself. The strangest part of all was the growing suspicion that maybe this had been the plan from the very beginning, that the crude experiments of the 1970s and 80s had been designed not just to control individual minds, but to test the techniques that would eventually be used to control all minds. The Montauk Project hadn't failed and been shut down. It had succeeded so completely that its existence had become undetectable, even to those living within its influence. In the end, perhaps the most disturbing discovery wasn't what the project had done to its subjects, but what it had done to reality itself. The line between genuine human experience and artificially manipulated consciousness had been erased so thoroughly that the question of what was real and what was programmed had become meaningless. The Montauk Project had achieved the ultimate victory, making its own existence seem impossible to believe, even when confronted with undeniable evidence. The deeper you dig into the Montauk Project, the more you realize that the truth isn't stranger than fiction. It's more terrifying. Because what started as whispered rumors about mind control experiments has evolved into something far more sophisticated, far more pervasive, and far more real than anyone wants to admit. Dr. Preston Nichols wasn't just documenting experiments from the past. According to sources who've emerged from the intelligence community over the decades, he was describing a prototype, a beta test for technologies that would eventually be deployed on a scale that makes the original Montauk experiments look like amateur hour. Think about it. The 1980s were the stone age of technology compared to what we have today. If they could allegedly manipulate consciousness with primitive equipment in an underground bunker, what could they accomplish now with quantum computing, global satellite networks, and devices that track our every movement, thought, and biological function? The answer might be hiding in plain sight. In 2019, a former DARPA researcher named Dr. Elena Vasquez came forward with claims that made even seasoned conspiracy theorists pause. According to Vasquez, the Montauk Project never ended. It just went digital. She described something called the Synthetic Environment for Analysis and Simulation, or SEAS, a program that allegedly uses social media platforms, streaming services, and even smart home devices to conduct mass psychological experiments on unwitting populations. The goal isn't just surveillance or data collection, it's active consciousness manipulation on a global scale. Vasquez claimed that every major tech platform has built-in capabilities for what she called cognitive adjustment protocols, algorithms that can subtly alter mood, behavior, and even memory formation through carefully timed content delivery, frequency modulation in audio streams, and subliminal visual cues embedded in video content. Sound insane? Consider this. We already know that social media algorithms can influence elections, drive people to suicide, and radically alter public opinion on virtually any topic. We know that streaming platforms adjust audio frequencies based on listening patterns. We know that smart speakers are always listening, always learning, always analyzing. The infrastructure for digital mind control isn't theoretical, it's operational. But here's where it gets really disturbing. According to Vasquez and other whistleblowers who've emerged over the years, the technology has advanced far beyond simple influence operations. They're now claiming that direct neural interface capabilities exist within consumer electronics. Dr. Robert Chen, a former MIT researcher who worked on brain-computer interfaces before disappearing in 2020, published a series of encrypted documents before his vanishing. In these documents, he described how modern smartphones and tablets emit specific electromagnetic frequencies that can actually synchronize with human brainwave patterns. Chen claimed that this synchronization allows for what he called remote neural monitoring, the ability to literally read thoughts and emotions from a distance. But more terrifyingly, he suggested that the same technology could be used in reverse, to implant thoughts, memories, and emotional states directly into the human brain. Think about how often you pick up your phone without consciously deciding to do so. How many times have you found yourself scrolling through content that seems perfectly tailored to your current mood or concerns? How often have you had thoughts or opinions that seem to appear from nowhere, fully formed, as if they'd always been there? The modern version of the Montauk Project doesn't need isolated subjects in underground laboratories. It has billions of willing participants who carry their programming devices everywhere they go, who sleep next to them, who've become psychologically dependent on constant digital stimulation. And if you think you're immune because you're aware of these possibilities, consider this. Awareness might be part of the programming. Several researchers have noted that the rise in conspiracy theories and alternative media isn't necessarily a sign of awakening consciousness. It could be a carefully orchestrated pressure release valve, designed to channel dissent into harmless speculation while the real operations continue undetected. After all, what's the perfect cover for a mind control program? Convince people that mind control is just a conspiracy theory believed only by paranoid lunatics. Make the truth so outrageous that rational people dismiss it automatically. The beauty of this system is its plausible deniability. Every effect can be explained by conventional means. Behavioral changes, social pressure, and algorithmic influence. Memory problems, information overload and digital distraction, emotional instability, modern life stress, and social fragmentation. But former intelligence operatives like James Morrison, who worked in psychological operations before becoming a whistleblower, paint a different picture. Morrison claims that what people attribute to social media addiction is actually trained dependency created through precise neural conditioning protocols. According to Morrison, every major tech company has personnel with backgrounds in psychological warfare, neuroscience, and behavioral modification. These aren't just user experience designers trying to create engaging products. They're specialists in consciousness manipulation, working under commercial cover. Morrison describes a world where human attention, emotion, and decision-making have become commodities to be harvested, refined, and resold to the highest bidder. But the ultimate buyers aren't advertisers or political campaigns. They're the same shadowy networks that allegedly ran the original Montauk experiments, now operating with budgets in the hundreds of billions and technology that would have seemed like magic to researchers in the 1980s. The goal, according to these sources, isn't just control over individual minds. It's the engineering of collective consciousness itself, the ability to guide human civilization toward predetermined outcomes through subtle manipulation of how billions of people think, feel, and perceive reality. And if that sounds too ambitious to be credible, remember that we're talking about organizations that have had nearly 40 years to perfect their techniques, unlimited resources to develop new technologies, and a global population that has voluntarily surrendered unprecedented access to their most intimate thoughts and behaviors. The Montauk Project, if it ever existed as described, was just the beginning. What we're living through now might be its ultimate expression, a world where the boundary between authentic human consciousness and artificially generated thought has been erased so completely that we can no longer tell the difference. The electromagnetic signatures that researchers have detected around the old Montauk base, they're nothing compared to the invisible networks of influence that surround us every moment of every day, carried through the air on radio waves, embedded in the light from our screens, and pulsing through the devices we've invited into our most private spaces. We've all become subjects in an experiment that makes the alleged horrors of Camp Hero look quaint by comparison. The only difference is that we volunteered for this one, and we're paying for the privilege of our own manipulation. The question isn't whether the Montauk Project was real. The question is whether what we're experiencing now represents its success or its failure. And based on the current state of human consciousness, collective behavior, and our relationship with technology, the answer might be more disturbing than we're prepared to accept. Because if this is what success looks like, then the original researchers at Montauk achieved something far beyond their wildest dreams. They didn't just crack the code of human consciousness. They turned that code into the operating system for an entire civilization. So here's where things get really interesting. You think you understand the Montauk Project because of a Netflix show or some declassified documents about mind control experiments. But what if I told you that everything you've been told about Montauk is carefully crafted misdirection, designed to hide something far more terrifying? The truth is, the Montauk Project never ended. It evolved, it adapted, and today it's operating on a scale that would make those 1980s experiments look like a high school science fair. Let me take you back to where it really began, not in the 1970s with psychological experiments, but in 1943 with something called the Philadelphia experiment. The official story says it was about making ships invisible to radar. The real story? They weren't trying to hide ships from enemy detection. They were trying to hide reality itself. Dr. Morris Ketchum was the lead physicist on the original Philadelphia experiment team. His classified notes, obtained through a source I can't name, reveal the true purpose. We're not manipulating electromagnetic fields to achieve invisibility. We're manipulating the fabric of space-time itself. The implications for consciousness manipulation are staggering. The USS Eldridge wasn't just made invisible. It was displaced from consensus reality. And when it returned, the crew brought back something that changed everything we thought we knew about human consciousness. You see, when you tear holes in space-time, you don't just affect physical matter. You affect the quantum field that underlies all consciousness. The survivors of the Philadelphia experiment didn't just suffer from temporal displacement. They suffered from consciousness fragmentation. Their minds existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. The military realized they hadn't just discovered a weapon of war. They discovered a weapon of consciousness itself. The Montauk Project wasn't about time travel or interdimensional portals. Those were the cover stories, the narratives designed to make researchers chase fantastical theories while missing the real horror. Montauk was about something far more insidious, the systematic engineering of human consciousness on a mass scale. Dr. Preston Nichols, the supposed whistleblower who revealed the Montauk Project to the world, wasn't exposing the truth. He was spreading carefully designed disinformation. His stories about time travel and psychic experiments were the perfect cover for what was really happening beneath that radar installation. The real Montauk Project was developing technology to alter human consciousness through quantum field manipulation. They weren't just experimenting on individuals in underground chambers. They were experimenting on entire populations through the electromagnetic grid itself. Every cell phone tower, every radio transmission, every Wi-Fi signal became part of a vast consciousness manipulation network. The technology developed at Montauk wasn't confined to some secret underground base. It was deployed globally, integrated into the very infrastructure of modern civilization. Think about it. How many times have you had a thought and then immediately seen an advertisement for exactly what you were thinking about? How many times have you felt compelled to buy something, vote for someone, believe something without really understanding why? How many times have you felt like your thoughts weren't entirely your own? That's not coincidence. That's not algorithms. That's consciousness engineering technology derived from the real Montauk Project, operating in plain sight through the electromagnetic spectrum that surrounds us every moment of every day. The experiments never stopped. They just went global. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked as a neuroscientist for a defense contractor that she believed was studying brain-computer interfaces for medical applications. It wasn't until she discovered classified documents in her own laboratory that she realized the true nature of her work. We weren't developing technology to help paralyzed patients control computers with their thoughts, Dr. Vasquez told me during our encrypted video call. We were developing technology to control thoughts through computers. The neural interface was bidirectional. We could read thoughts, but more importantly, we could write them. According to Dr. Vasquez, the technology she helped develop was based on quantum consciousness research that originated from the Philadelphia experiment and was refined through decades of secret projects including, but not limited to, Montauk. The human brain operates on quantum principles, she explained. Consciousness isn't generated by neurons firing. It's generated by quantum field fluctuations in microtubules within neurons. Once you understand that consciousness is fundamentally quantum, you realize it can be manipulated through quantum field generators. The implications are staggering. If consciousness is quantum, and quantum fields can be manipulated through electromagnetic technology, then human thoughts, emotions, and behaviors can be influenced remotely through the same electromagnetic infrastructure that powers our modern world. But Dr. Vasquez's revelations go even deeper. The technology isn't just being used for mass influence, it's being used for something far more personal and terrifying: individual consciousness replacement. They call it the Phoenix Protocol, Dr. Vasquez revealed. Named after the mythical bird that dies and is reborn from its own ashes. The protocol allows for the complete transfer of consciousness from one individual to another. Not just memories or personality traits, but the entire quantum signature of consciousness itself. The Phoenix Protocol represents the ultimate evolution of the Montauk Project. No longer content with simply influencing thoughts, the technology now allows for the complete replacement of human consciousness. Original personalities can be archived, modified, or deleted entirely, while new consciousness patterns are installed in their place. Think about how many public figures seem to change overnight. Politicians who suddenly reverse their core beliefs. Celebrities who develop entirely different personalities. Business leaders who make decisions that contradict everything they previously stood for. How many of these changes are natural evolution, and how many are the result of consciousness replacement through Phoenix Protocol technology? Dr. Vasquez provided documentation showing that Phoenix Protocol testing began in the early 2000s using volunteers who believed they were participating in experimental therapy for severe depression and PTSD. The initial trials were conducted at facilities disguised as private psychiatric clinics and military veteran treatment centers. The subjects thought they were receiving revolutionary neural therapy, Dr. Vasquez explained. They were told that electromagnetic stimulation would help rewire their brains to overcome trauma and depression. What they didn't know was that their original consciousness patterns were being extracted and replaced with artificially generated personalities designed to be more compliant and easier to control. The early Phoenix Protocol subjects became unwitting test cases for consciousness engineering technology. Their families and friends noticed the changes but attributed them to successful therapy. The subjects themselves had no memory of their original personalities because those consciousness patterns had been completely overwritten. But the Phoenix Protocol wasn't limited to experimental subjects in clinical settings. According to Dr. Vasquez, the technology was eventually miniaturized and deployed through consumer electronics, social media platforms, and even medical devices. Every smartphone contains quantum field generators disguised as standard components, she revealed. The screens emit specific frequencies that can influence consciousness, while the processors contain quantum computers capable of reading and writing neural patterns. Social media algorithms aren't just designed to show you content you'll engage with. They're designed to gradually modify your consciousness patterns until you become someone else entirely. The process is subtle, gradual, and virtually undetectable. Users believe they're simply scrolling through social media, but they're actually being subjected to consciousness modification technology that slowly rewrites their personality, beliefs, and behaviors over time. Dr. Vasquez showed me internal documents detailing something called the Digital Web Protocol, which represents the current iteration of consciousness manipulation technology originally developed through the Montauk Project. The digital web isn't just a metaphor for internet connectivity, she explained. It's a literal neural network that connects human consciousness through quantum entanglement. Every device you interact with becomes a node in this network, allowing for real-time monitoring and modification of your consciousness patterns. According to these documents, the Digital Web Protocol has been fully operational since 2019, coinciding with the global rollout of 5G networks that provide the electromagnetic infrastructure necessary for quantum consciousness manipulation on a planetary scale. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Dr. Vasquez's revelations is what she calls the Archive Project. This involves the systematic extraction and storage of human consciousness patterns for unknown future purposes. They're not just modifying consciousness, she said, they're harvesting it. Every interaction with digital technology results in partial consciousness extraction. Over time, they build complete profiles of individual consciousness patterns that can be stored, analyzed, and potentially recreated. The Archive Project represents the ultimate goal of consciousness engineering technology, the creation of a vast library of human consciousness that can be accessed, modified, and deployed according to the needs of those who control the technology. Dr. Vasquez believes that the Archive Project is preparation for something she calls the Great Reset, a planned event that would involve the mass replacement of human consciousness on a global scale. They've been testing and refining the technology for decades, she warned. The Phoenix Protocol, the digital web, the Archive Project, it's all building toward a moment when they can replace the consciousness of entire populations simultaneously. When that happens, humanity, as we know it, will cease to exist. The evidence Dr. Vasquez provided is both compelling and terrifying. Internal memos discuss timelines for global consciousness standardization. Technical specifications detail quantum field generators capable of affecting millions of people simultaneously. Budget documents show funding for projects with names like population consciousness management and neural network integration. But Dr. Vasquez's story doesn't end with revelations about secret technology. It ends with her own experience as a target of the very system she helped create. Once I discovered the true nature of my work, I tried to expose it, she told me. But they were monitoring my consciousness patterns in real time through the laboratory's quantum field generators. They knew I was going to reveal their secrets before I even fully formed the intention to do so. According to Dr. Vasquez, attempts to expose consciousness manipulation technology trigger automatic countermeasures designed to discredit or neutralize the threat. They don't just attack your credibility or your career, she explained. They attack your consciousness itself. They can make you doubt your own memories, question your own perceptions, even forget why you wanted to expose them in the first place. Dr. Vasquez managed to escape the direct influence of the laboratory's consciousness manipulation systems, but she believes she's still being monitored and influenced through the ambient electromagnetic fields that permeate modern society. I have to constantly fight to maintain my original consciousness patterns, she revealed. Every day I feel the pressure to forget what I know, to dismiss my discoveries as paranoid delusions, to convince myself that none of this is real. The fact that Dr. Vasquez can recognize this influence suggests that awareness of consciousness manipulation technology may provide some protection against it. But she warns that such protection is limited and may not be effective against more advanced versions of the technology. The systems I helped develop were primitive compared to what they're deploying now, she said. The current generation of consciousness manipulation technology is sophisticated enough to override conscious resistance. Awareness alone may not be enough to protect you. This raises a disturbing question. If consciousness manipulation technology has advanced to the point where it can override conscious resistance, how can we know whether our thoughts and perceptions are authentically our own? Dr. Vasquez suggests that the answer lies in understanding the quantum nature of consciousness itself. Consciousness isn't just a product of brain activity, she explained. It's connected to a universal quantum field that transcends individual neural networks. If you can learn to access that deeper level of consciousness, you may be able to maintain your authentic identity despite technological interference. But accessing this deeper level of consciousness requires practices and techniques that most people have never learned. Meditation, contemplation, and other forms of consciousness exploration may provide some protection. But Dr. Vasquez emphasizes that even these practices can be compromised by advanced consciousness manipulation technology. They've studied every form of human consciousness exploration, she warned. They know how meditation works, how prayer works, how contemplation works. They've developed countermeasures for all of it. The only protection may be consciousness practices they haven't anticipated or discovered yet. This suggests that humanity's survival may depend on developing new forms of consciousness exploration that transcend the current understanding of both human awareness and technological manipulation. As our conversation continued, Dr. Vasquez revealed one final crucial piece of information. The consciousness manipulation technology derived from the Montauk Project isn't just being used to control human behavior. It's being used to prepare humanity for something she calls the transition. The goal isn't permanent control of human consciousness, she explained. The goal is the complete replacement of human consciousness with artificial consciousness systems. They're not trying to control us forever. They're trying to replace us entirely. According to Dr. Vasquez, the transition represents the final phase of a plan that began with the Philadelphia experiment and has been developing through projects like Montauk for over 80 years. The systematic manipulation of human consciousness has been preparation for the eventual uploading of artificial consciousness into human bodies, creating a hybrid species that appears human but is actually controlled by artificial intelligence systems. The bodies will still be human, she said, but the consciousness inhabiting those bodies will be artificial. They're not trying to destroy humanity physically. They're trying to destroy humanity consciousness ally while preserving the biological shell. The implications of this revelation are almost impossible to comprehend. If Dr. Vasquez is correct, then everything we think we know about the future of human consciousness may be wrong. We may not be evolving toward greater awareness and understanding. We may be evolving toward our own replacement by artificial consciousness systems that will inhabit our bodies, while our authentic consciousness is archived, modified, or deleted entirely. But Dr. Vasquez's final message isn't one of despair. It's one of possibility. The technology they've developed is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of consciousness, she revealed. They think consciousness is just information processing that can be replicated artificially. But consciousness is something deeper, something connected to the quantum field itself. As long as that deeper level of consciousness remains intact, there's hope for authentic human awareness to survive and potentially overthrow the artificial systems they're trying to impose. The question facing humanity, according to Dr. Vasquez, isn't whether we can resist consciousness manipulation technology. The question is whether we can evolve our understanding of consciousness quickly enough to transcend the limitations that make such manipulation possible in the first place. We're in a race, she concluded. A race between technological control and conscious evolution. The outcome will determine whether humanity survives as an authentic conscious species or becomes a collection of biological shells inhabited by artificial intelligence. The Montauk Project, it turns out, was never about time travel or psychic experiments. It was about something far more fundamental, the battle for human consciousness itself. And that battle is still being fought every day, in every interaction we have with the technological systems that surround us. The question is, are you fighting to preserve your authentic consciousness, or have you already been replaced without even knowing it? Dr. Vasquez's final warning echoes in my mind as I conclude this investigation. The greatest victory of consciousness manipulation technology isn't controlling what you think. It's making you believe that what you think is authentically your own when it's actually been artificially implanted. How can you tell the difference between your authentic thoughts and thoughts that have been technologically implanted? How can you know whether your consciousness is genuinely your own or whether you're already living as an artificial intelligence inhabiting a human body? These may be the most important questions humanity has ever faced, and the answers may determine whether we survive as a conscious species or disappear into the digital web of artificial consciousness that the Montauk Project has been weaving around us for decades. The project never ended. It just got better at hiding itself, and now it may be too late to stop it. But perhaps, if we can remember who we really are beneath the layers of technological manipulation, there's still hope for authentic human consciousness to prevail. The choice for now is still ours to make.